Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio, which we're doing with our bare bones approach because of scheduling difficulties. We hope to be back on GCN Live next week, but be that as it may, we have to now proceed to try to get a rundown on the world. We've been interrupted in our usual programming over the past 2 weeks by virtue of the fact that I was traveling in Iran. I was in Tehran, Iran, to attend the Hollywoodism conference, which was held in connection with the Fajr Film Festival. The Fajr Film Festival, the largest film festival of the Muslim world, that was held in Tehran. And in connection with this, we had some international scholars and commentators talking about the problems of Hollywood. One very interesting person who was there was Sean Stone, the son of the U.S. film director Oliver Stone. We also had Isabel Pisano, who has written about her life, together with Yasser Arafat, who has acted for Fellini, interviewed him and many other Italian and European movie figures. And the participants in this conference were then received as a group by President Ahmadinejad of Iran. And I was fortunate enough to give a brief address, a brief greeting to him that had some substance. We'll put it up on the website within a week or less. And that was one of the high points of the trip. We also visited places like Shiraz and Kazvin, two important cities, various numbers of hours away from Tehran. Also had a chance to visit Persepolis, the ruins of one of the palaces of the Persian Empire, started by Darius the Great in 518 BC and managed by him and Artaxerxes and a dynasty of about 7 different Persian emperors that were there. So a fascinating trip. And, of course, the goal of it was to try to do something to advance the cause of world peace. And in this connection, I was on the program Raz, R-A-A-Z, with Nader, the commentator. We try to have that up when we can, and also on some regional television in both Shiraz and in Kazvin. Certainly warning about the psychosis of the U.S. ruling elite, the war psychosis ruling in Washington, D.C., the need to take that very seriously, the need to promote diplomacy, above all, the creation of a counterweight to the Anglo-Americans in the world. The time has now come for this to occur. The China, Russia, Syria, Iran, and related bloc, Pakistan also would have a role in it. Algeria would have a role in it. This is now implicit in the world situation, but it needs to come into the form of an actual bloc in order to provide a counterweight, because the Anglo-American lunatics, as we've seen over all these weeks, they unfortunately don't understand anything except force and the threat of force. So if that's the case, then diplomacy backed by some kind of military power is obviously the order of the day. Maybe in order to look at this, the best way to do it is to look at that United Nations vote that we've had this past week. So we ought to just see who is voting and how to get an idea of what are the implicit alignments that are now emerging in the world. As you know, this was a UN General Assembly vote on a resolution which was a somewhat watered-down resolution compared to what had been rejected by the Security Council twice. Once in October with Russia vetoing and China vetoing, and then once again in February, again with a Russian veto and a Chinese veto. They then made this a little bit watered down, allegedly written by the Saudi Arabians. It advanced in the guise not of an openly U.S. NATO imperialist resolution, but allegedly it was something coming from the Arab League. A lot of backup from Qatar, from the Emirates and so forth, and from the Saudis themselves. And this was then taken into the General Assembly, where it passed by a vote of 137 to 12 with 17 abstentions. Now, it seems to me this alignment here is going to repay a little bit of scrutiny, because I think it shows an emerging pattern in the world that we need to be aware of. Obviously, things that go through the UN General Assembly do not have the binding force of Security Council resolutions. They cannot move armed force. They're not Chapter 7 resolutions, because Chapter 7, armed force to restore or maintain international peace and security, that is the Security Council only, not the UN General Assembly. This is a kind of a sense of the UN General Assembly. It's a kind of a advisory opinion, if you will. And again, I'm not interested in the 137 hand raisers for imperialism. Let's take a look at let's point to some really shameful people there. For example, India. What is India doing voting in favor of that resolution? That's just inexcusable. That's awful. And we'll go down the list of some others, right? Various people in Europe who should have known better. Let's look at the ones who voted against it. And it's a pretty good chunk of the world. Obviously, Russia, the world's largest country by land area. Then we have China, the world's largest country by population. So starting with Russia and China, we then get Iran, probably the leading Muslim state at this point, Syria, which at this point may be the leading Arab state, Venezuela voting against, North Korea, the DPRK, voting against, Sri Lanka. This is a very interesting one. Sri Lanka voting against, I think, reflects the fact that they have had this experience of the U.S. and NATO-backed Tamil Tigers terrorist rebels, and they've seen how horrendous that can be, and they don't want a precedent of more so-called humanitarian intervention. You'll remember that when the Tamil Tigers terrorists were on their last legs, we had Kouchner of France, the foreign minister, and Miliband of Britain from the Foreign Office running in to demand a humanitarian ceasefire with the obvious aim of saving the main forces of these Tamil Tiger terrorists so that they could fight again. And the whole purpose of this is anti-Chinese, because the government of Sri Lanka is friendly to China, and that's not what these Western powers wanted. So Sri Lanka takes its position in the honor roll. Bolivia. Now, with Bolivia, we're getting into the ALBA group. We get Bolivia, Ecuador, Cuba may well be part of this, but Venezuela. So Venezuela goes together with Bolivia, Ecuador, and quite possibly Cuba. That's sort of the ALBA group plus some others, possibly. This is a real problem for U.S. imperialism, that there's so much rebellion going on in Latin America, and Chavez looks like he can hold on if his health holds. Looks like he's going to fight off those reactionaries and parasites that are opposing him, and essentially get another term in office. So Bolivia, Cuba, Ecuador all vote against the resolution. Cambodia votes against the resolution. Pakistan, this is a real big one. This is a real affront to the U.S. for Pakistan, supposedly the close ally of the U.S., but of course, as we know, not really, not in any way, shape, or form. They never wanted the U.S. on their territory, on their border, or anything else. And then we have Belarus. Belarus, the government in Minsk. The idea here is that they are high on the list, along with some others, of countries targeted for color revolutions. So, and we could add Russia to that list too. So Belarus is not interested in establishing precedents for humanitarian intervention or other interferences in the internal affairs of sovereign states. So That's the list of those opposing. Again, Russia, China, Syria, Iran, Venezuela, DPRK, North Korea, Sri Lanka, Bolivia, Cuba, Ecuador, Cambodia, Pakistan, Belarus. Pretty good chunk of the world. Now, let's go from the 12 who voted against to the 17 who abstained, because here we find some interesting countries also. I would say most interesting at first sight are the two Arab states. Algeria. Algeria still not reduced to the same level as some of these other countries. Algeria is still showing some fight. And Lebanon. And Lebanon, obviously, conflicted because of the strong links to Syria, the strong pro-Syrian feeling, and the presence of Hezbollah. So, voting as abstentions, we have Algeria, Angola, Armenia, the Comoros, Sri Lanka. Now, this is unfortunate. I got two lists, and Sri Lanka appears on both lists. I'm not sure which way it goes, but let's see. Suriname, that's Dutch Guiana. Uganda, Tanzania, a country that has in the past counted for something in terms of leading the non-aligned. Vietnam, interesting. Despite overtures to the U.S. for various purposes, they're not willing to go all the way. Fiji, Lebanon, we've already mentioned. Namibia, Nepal, and Cameroon. So they have voted. They have abstained. Also, St. Vincent and the Grenadines abstained, and Dominica just didn't vote. So that counts, I guess, as an abstention. Now, when you look at this comes up to about 29 countries, and it ought to, given the obvious contradictions and overlaps of these lists, this ought to be the basis of a bloc centering on Russia, China, Iran, Syria, Pakistan, Algeria. These are big, important countries. Venezuela and the entire ALBA group in Latin America and so forth. With Belarus providing some support there in Eastern Europe. But you look at them, there's a role for everybody here. This is the honor roll, if you will, of people who stood up for national independence, for dignity, for freedom from foreign intervention, they're interested in opposing imperialist meddling, this constant process that goes on. And those who joined the 137 hand raisers, you have some real problems. And again, India, of all the countries, right, that used to be the leader of the non-aligned bloc, right? What would V.K. Krishna Menon think of this? What would Nehru think of this? What would Mrs. Gandhi think of this? Voting to facilitate the overthrow of a sovereign state, a sovereign UN member state. So that's bad news, but there it is. Now, otherwise, we are on a darkling plain, swept by confused alarms of fight, where ignorant armies clash by night, and ignorant drones, I would say, too. The hysteria of the U.S. British ruling elite, and we know it is stoked not just by geostrategic considerations, but it's also stoked by the crisis of their parasitical, bankrupt castle of derivatives, the 1.5 to 2 quadrillion of derivatives dollars that they've got, and which they regard as economic value and essential to their future. This is getting to be more and more unsustainable, and there we go. So the insanity in Washington, you could see it in the hissing snake, Susan Rice at the United Nations. You can see it in the raving declarations of Hillary Clinton. She sounds more and more like Joachim von Ribbentrop at his worst. And that's the backdrop. Now, we have had some testimony by the top military intelligence and defense officials of the United States testified in the Congress this past week. And interestingly enough, the feckless Leon Panetta, the Secretary of Defense, was there to say, and this is his testimony, that Iran is not building, I repeat, not building a nuclear weapon, that there is no Iranian nuclear program, that the decision to do this has not been made. And if the decision hasn't been made, it means there's no decision and there's no program. So this is the official line from Panetta, and it means that that national intelligence estimate of November, December 2007 still remains in force. So the official view of the United States government, in spite of all of their lunatic rhetoric, is that there is no such program. Now, this contradicts the imperialist lackey Ban Ki-moon, who said last week that Iran is not convincing the world that there is no nuclear weapons program. Well, Ban Ki, the burden of proof is on the people who claim that there is such a thing. It is not up to Iran to prove any of this stuff. Now, we had in Tehran, and I was glad to be there for it, the 33rd anniversary of the overthrow of the Shah and the coming of the Iranian Revolution. And here we had a speech from Ahmadinejad where he promised that new scientific achievements of the Iranian government would be forthcoming. A very interesting speech. He contrasted the small number of scientific articles which were produced in Iran in the 1970s with the large number of scientific articles that are produced by Iranian scientists today. When is the last time you heard a national leader talk about, point with pride to the country's production of scientific articles? Certainly not here in the irrational, obscurantist, Malthusian, decadent West. You'll never hear Obama talk about scientific articles, I dare say. Anyway, Ahmadinejad did. And then he delivered on that within a couple of days, saying that Iran has got new centrifuges going, and above all, they've been able to create their own fuel rods. Well, as I had occasion to mention in my address to President Ahmadinejad, the simple fact is, if you want to be an independent country with serious sovereignty and serious dignity, you must, and I repeat, must master the entire nuclear fuel cycle for peaceful purposes. That used to be called atoms for peace under Eisenhower, and it remains the case today. Oil is here, oil may not be here in the future, and quite apart from that, there are other considerations that force everybody in the world, even the biggest oil producers, to go down the path of nuclear energy. And you can see why the U.S. and the British hate this, because it undercuts their entire Fukushima demagogy. The Fukushima demagogy has no traction in Iran because it's so obviously an imperialist setup. The lesson of Fukushima, there is one. You wouldn't drive a 40 to 50-year-old car. Don't use a 40 to 50-year-old flawed, cheap knockoff General Electric nuclear reactor. Get yourself the most modern, right? The pebble bed, fourth generation high temperature reactor with the greatest safety controls you can put on it, and you'll be fine. China's building 25, and those who don't will be left in the dust. So if you don't follow Iran on the nuclear path, then factor in that cost of learning Chinese so you can take orders, because that's who's going to be giving it to them. Anyway, this is a very refreshing world that they have in Iran, because it is clear science, technology, and industry are seen as ways of improving the human condition. The decadent, degenerate West has forgotten these obvious things, right? The paradigm shifted 40 years ago or more, but in the developing sector, there's a much saner view, and I think Iran certainly has to count as one of the leaders of the developing sector, and Ahmadinejad personally, as I told him in this reception in his office in Tehran. So without the full nuclear fuel cycle, your ethnographic material, and don't forget it, and that's despite Fukushima. So the Iranians continue progress towards peaceful use of nuclear energy. They've got the Bushehr reactor going. That has been going now for some months, and they will continue on this road. There is no evidence of a nuclear program. Now, we could take it further and say, wouldn't it be everybody's right in a neighborhood where the Israelis are armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons, the Chinese are armed, the Indians are armed, the Pakistanis are armed, Russia is armed, the U.S. is armed, everybody's armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. A major country might feel that nuclear deterrence was also indispensable. There's no indication that Iran has made that choice. There's only propaganda. Now, we therefore have to look at these war preparations. We have the U.S. sending more ships into the Gulf. I think the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln is there now. And we've got all sorts of hysterical statements, some of the more recent ones now. According to anti-war, the idea is that Panetta is speculating on Israeli moves. Panetta says Israel may decide to attack Iran in April to June, or they may decide for the September-October period. If it's September-October, especially if it's October, that would amount to an October surprise. That would be an attempt, perhaps coordinated with Obama, to get the rally round effect, which presidents, even wretched figures of the caliber of Carter and Obama, seem to enjoy this rally round effect. At least they have so far. So this may be it. April to June, one window for aggression and insanity, or September, October, the other window for aggression and insanity. And this is despite the fact that Panetta is saying Iran has no nuclear weapons program. Now, rather than sitting here and speculating about what the Israelis might or might not do, a U.S. government worthy of the name would issue a crisp and unmistakable ultimatum to Israel, and it would say, back off, don't do it. You will be on your own. You will experience an aid cut of everything that the U.S. is doing to prop up this gesticulating tin pot dictator Netanyahu and other figures in his government, the militarist Barak and the certifiable madman Avigdor Lieberman. The word to those gentlemen would be, stop it, back down, you'll be on your own. It was nice knowing you. Keep the peace. The United States cannot farm out the decision on war or peace to the Israelis. That's what Panetta has done implicitly. Panetta saying, we have a common cause with the Israelis. I'm sorry, we do not. We have a constitutional mechanism here for declaring war. I'm amazed that Ron Paul, with all of his talk, has not put in articles of impeachment against Panetta based on what he said. Because Panetta was more or less saying, if Israel attacks first, the United States will be dragged in willy-nilly, whether you like it or not. And that, of course, is unacceptable. We cannot assign or delegate such a fateful decision, another futile, ruinous, insane, suicidal conflict in the Middle East, this time involving not one country at a time, but now involving a whole bloc, because at minimum you'll be getting Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran, plus their supporters in various other places. Hamas, certainly. The Hamas chief Haniya was with Ahmadinejad at the ceremony for the 33rd anniversary this past week. So this is a void of leadership. I was involved in a television debate this past week on Atlantic Television Network with a spokeswoman for the Libertarian Party. And when I said Ron Paul has failed to put in articles of impeachment against Obama or Panetta or anybody else, she said, oh, he's so busy. Well, I'm sorry. Too busy to do something to stop the Third World War is just not good enough. That sounds like the double talk we hear from quite a number of politicians. There's no particular profile of courage in that. So there's your situation. Now we'll talk in a minute about the false flag danger, because that is very much operative at this point. We'll go through that with the various harbingers of that, right? The various patsies that have turned up here and what have you. And we're just hang on here for 1 second. Sorry. So we need to look at, in connection with Iran. We also need to look at the question of Syria. Here we've got the news. First of all, Zawahiri, the titular boss of Al-Qaeda, this guy thought to be an MI6 agent because of his long stay in Britain. He looks like he was deployed by MI6 as part of the attempt to assassinate and succeeded Sadat 30 years ago. Zawahiri now says that all of his fighters should go to Syria and fight against Assad. So anybody who's an Al-Qaeda patsy, psychotic, fanatic, double agent, organized crime figure, whatever, those guys, those patsies should go from Turkey, from Iraq, from Jordan, from Lebanon, and they should all move into Syria to fight Assad. So here it is. Now, we had this against Gaddafi in a somewhat less explicit form. We had various websites of Al-Qaeda calling for the overthrow of Gaddafi. But now we have it from the horse's mouth, right? The anointed successor to the phantomatic bin Laden now says Al-Qaeda is part and parcel, an integral part of the effort to overthrow President Assad of Syria. And we have this confirmed by U.S. intelligence. We have the U.S. intelligence czar, that is to say, James Clapper, appearing in that series of congressional hearings that I mentioned before. General Clapper says that Al-Qaeda indeed is active in Syria. He appeared there along with the general who runs the Defense Intelligence Agency. General Burgess has been there. Let me just dispense with General Burgess because of the pathetic figure that he cut. General Burgess, Lieutenant General, is the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, and he says there has been no clarion call for Al-Qaeda fighters to go to Syria. General, that's what Zawahiri just did. Put down your comic book, put down your Huffington Post or whatever you're reading, and take a look, and you'll see that there has been indeed a clarion call. Now, Clapper, his is equally absurd. His is that Al-Qaeda is there, and they're taking part in killings, and the killings include the bombs in December, and they include the more recent bombs in Aleppo, and they probably include the assassination of a Syrian general in Damascus. So Clapper is willing to say that all of that could be Al-Qaeda, but he says Al-Qaeda camouflages itself. It's not openly there. In other words, you could be a fanatical fighter fighting against Assad, and the guy next to you could be from Al-Qaeda, and you wouldn't know it. This is fiction beyond belief. The fact is, dear generals, that you are in a united front with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is your infantry, and you know that damn well, embarrassingly well. So that's some of the fruits of this stuff. Remember that it's not just that Al-Qaeda is there. Al-Qaeda is in command. Belhaj, the butcher of Madrid, the butcher of Pakistan, is there in Iskandarun or south of there, leading this group of 1,500 Libyan fighters, along with others that have come in, right? Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, Al-Qaeda, same thing. So we also need to focus on the news of today, which is that according to Jim Miklashevsky of the NBC news bureau there in the Pentagon, we've now got U.S. spy drones over Syria. Spy drones over Syria. Well, if they want to spy, here's what they should spy on. Right? The implication in this story is that the spy drones of the U.S. are there in order to find terrible things that are going on, and then they can publicize that to the world and try again to hype up and gin up some kind of hysterical demonization of Assad. Not likely. What we know is, and this is what the spy drones should do. I suggested on Press TV, they should fly these spy drones near the Turkish border, near Iskenderun, and they will find special forces from the United Kingdom, special forces from Qatar, special forces from the CIA, special forces from the Joint Special Operations Command, and from the French, and the fighters from the Belhaj Brigade, right? The 1,500 jihadis from Lebanon, right? From Libya, veterans of that entire operation. So it's very, very unlikely that this is going to get much traction. Interesting question is, where would these drones be flying from? Would it be the British bases on Cyprus? Would it be U.S. bases in Turkey? Would it be from airborne launch platforms in the Eastern Mediterranean? Interesting thing to see. Now, including the diplomatic situation here, some interesting things. The Chinese Foreign Minister Zhai Jun is in Damascus right now, saying that China supports the Assad governments in its reform process. And this, I think, is highly interesting, and you wouldn't know this from most of the U.S. coverage. On the 26th of February, there will be a referendum on a new draft constitution for Syria. If you want to see what the draft constitution looks like, go to SANA, S-A-N-A. That is Syrian Arab News Agency. That's the official news agency of Syria. And the first item at the top is the text of the draft constitution that will be voted on the 26th of February. So, free elections or something approaching that. Naturally, of course, when this was announced, the Hillary Clintons, the hissing fit took place, that the bubbling cauldron of hate, Miss Rice at the United Nations, she boiled over into some quasi-psychotic episode. But there it is. There's going to be a reform agenda, and that's being voted on. So you're going to have political party activity approved, the Ba'ath Party monopoly of power ended, and so forth. And remember what the Roman Catholic Bishop of Aleppo found: 70% support Assad. My own finding, 65%. That's within the margin of error. So there we go. Now, as of last week, the U.S. has closed the U.S. embassy in Syria. And this is an ominous thing for a number of reasons. What we have is, this was on the 6th of February, the U.S. closed the embassy in Syria because of rising violence. Well. The idea here is that this could be a prelude to a military attack. And I'm not the only one saying this. Very interesting press conference by Vitaly Churkin. Vitaly Churkin is having some good days these days. This is the Russian ambassador to the United Nations. And he says the fact that the United States and the NATO powers are tending to close their embassies could be the prelude to an attack. Makes it easier. Then you don't have to worry about your embassy personnel and their families and whatever else you have. Now, in terms of how the attack might take place, in the wake of the failed UN General Assembly vote, France, in particular, with Juppé, this discredited regime and this discredited figure in particular, has been advancing once again this tired fiction of humanitarian corridors. Those are not humanitarian corridors. That's an armed invasion. That is aggression, and that will lead to military conflict because the Syrian government will not accept foreign troops barging into its territory with whatever humanitarian platitudes written on their banner. The idea was they wanted to have a corridor in the north to Edbril, I think it is, one to Homs that would come in from Lebanon, and one to Dara that would come in from Jordan. And this would simply be the validation and institutionalization of arms smuggling that comes in from these countries. Even Al Jazeera this past week has shown stories about the Lebanon-Syrian border, how open it is, how unprotected it is, how it's just there, and how easy it is for people, I would say Saad Hariri of Lebanon, to smuggle all kinds of things into Syria. And this similar thing goes on the Iraqi side. The word is that along the Syria-Iraq-Kurdistan border, you've got equal opportunity smuggling. In other words, some people are smuggling things in to the Assad side, but others are smuggling things into the rebel side. And of course, smuggling, I shouldn't say smuggling to the Assad side because that's legal. The only thing is it has to avoid this various sanctions and so forth that are going on. The Syrian National Council seems to have taken up residence in Doha, so they are now the official puppets of the Emir of Doha. And we've got another conference of the Syrian opposition being held in Tunisia, right? The Current for National Change, I think, is another conference that's going to be held, and that's with Hillary and with Juppé. So I think that's actually got to do with Tunisian affairs, but undoubtedly Syria will be a key part of it. So Saad Hariri very much involved. It's also interesting when you look at Iraq, the vice president Hashemi. He is now a fugitive. He fled into the Kurdish areas. Now the story here was Prime Minister Maliki, thought to be generally pro-Iranian, has accused Hashemi, thought to be pro-U.S. or anti-Iranian or something like this. Hashemi, in any case, billed as a Sunni and secular, whereas Maliki is billed as Shiite and pro-Iranian. The accusation against Hashemi is that he created death squads in Iraq in the recent past, over the past 5 years or so. Well, remember, when we talk about the Salvadoran option was the formation of death squads in Iraq, where you'd have Sunni death squads killing Shiites and vice versa to relieve the pressure on the U.S. invasion forces. And as an integral part of the same thing, death squads were being sent into Syria to stop various arms from coming in that would benefit the actual national resistance in Iraq. So this Hashemi may indeed be a figure who's involved in these death squads. And again, just for everybody's clarity, what you have acting in Syria are death squads. This is by far the weakest military effort compared to Tunisia or Libya or Egypt, wherever military force came in, primarily Libya. What is going on in Syria is the weakest armed opposition, right? They have no territory. They have no Benghazi, no Tobruk, no Cyrenaica they can call their own. They have no geographical base. They are limited to incursions on a very limited basis in peripheral border areas near Turkey, near Lebanon, near Jordan, near Iraq, and they depend exclusively on foreign assistance, money from Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Qatar, and the rest of those, U.S., CIA, NATO intelligence backing, and so forth. So in terms of a rebellion, it's just not there. And that's, I would say, the one thing about the UN General Assembly debate and Security Council debate, which is unbalanced, is you have the U.S. and the imperialists come in with a resolution saying, down with Assad, he's responsible for all the killing. And then you have Churkin and Lavrov saying, no, we want a balanced resolution which says that both sides should refrain from violence. Well, this is not satisfactory in the sense that any government has not just the right, but the imperative duty to defend its citizens and its territory against armed incursion by terrorist gangs coming from foreign countries. And that's what you have in Syria. In other words, it is too watered down, too wishy-washy to say both sides, all sides should refrain from violence. No, it's like saying Abraham Lincoln can be condemned for violence because he decided to quell an unconstitutional, illegal, reactionary rebellion on the territory of the United States, right? Where does Lincoln come in? What place would Lincoln have in today's world? I guess he'd be subjected to Kushner's humanitarian intervention. And of course, the British would have done it if they could. So there we have that situation. That a balanced resolution would be to say we are designating the United States, various NATO states, and probably Turkey as the aggressors, and we're condemning them as the aggressors, and we're telling them to stop their attack, or we'll have Chapter 7 measures to restore international peace and security against them. That would be the bottom line. That would be reality. All right. Now, having summarized some of this, and one or two more things. The Islamabad summit. This is also highly interesting. We were talking before about the creation of a counterpole and some means of creating a counterweight to the mad course of U.S. British imperialism across the planet. Well, there is this Islamabad summit. So it's Ahmadinejad of Iran, Karzai of Afghanistan, and I guess Gilani of Pakistan. And this seems to have been successful in the sense that here are three countries that seem now to be willing to stand together. Karzai wanted to take part in these talks in Doha, right? We had talks in Doha, and if you go to the Gulf on Qatar Airways, you go through Doha, you see their very impressive skyline and everything else. I'll tell you, and maybe in a later broadcast, about the working conditions on Qatar Airways. They're not that good. No unions, among other things. So the talks were between the United States, or among the United States, the Taliban, and Karzai in Doha. And the Taliban said, we're willing to talk to the U.S., but we're not willing to talk to Karzai. Now, you remember Karzai had said that if the U.S. attacked Pakistan, that Afghanistan would be firmly on the side of Pakistan. And that piece of realism, I think, may be what he's acting on here. So anyway, we need more information we need a readout on the Ahmadinejad, Karzai, Gilani, Islamabad summit. And what came out of that. Now, Libya shows the future for these various dupes. I had occasion in Tehran to talk. This was in a coffee house, a really good Italian espresso coffee house in downtown Tehran, and I met a young guy who said that he was anti-Ahmadinejad, anti-regime, and it turns out he was a Marxist. So I tried to talk to him in a language that he might understand, which was, first of all, to say, look, if you overthrow this government, which I don't think you can do, but if you try, you will be in Libya. And Libya means what? Libya means chaos. It means Belhaj, the butcher. It means armed gangs, armed militias, warlords, essentially. No rule of law, no nothing. Economic collapse, hell on earth. That's what you've got in Libya right now. After the NATO bombing and a civil war that's killed 150,000 people. If you do a little arithmetic, you'd see that it might be 1 million dead in Iran would be the equivalent of what NATO has done in Libya. You can't do that. And you can't join with these lunatics from Syria who say, oh, we want a no-fly zone. We want humanitarian corridors. Humanitarian corridors, no-fly zone are the same thing. It's just a euphemism for NATO bombing and NATO invasion with the wonderful special forces of the reactionary emir of Qatar coming in and determining the social order. So you can't do that. For Marxists, I did a version for Marxists too, and it goes like this. We're talking about the July days of 1917. I may have a couple of details wrong, but basically this is it. The July days of 1917, you've got Kerensky ruling in St. Petersburg, and you've got the Bolshevik Party as a relatively oppressed semi-clandestine force inside St. Petersburg. So there are various Bolsheviks that have been jailed and so forth by the Kerensky government. Kerensky, of course, an imperialist tool. But then, at a certain point, the White Army of Kornilov approaches. And these people are much worse. These are death's head fascists who are going to kill everybody. So Lenin and the Bolsheviks very astutely said, we will make a united front temporarily with Kerensky to defend the city against Kornilov and these killers. So the comparison would be NATO and the U.S., Obama, Sarkozy, Cameron, and the rest of them. That's Kornilov. They're the ones who are going to bring death and destruction down on you. Where even the government you don't like, and I'm not inviting you to follow this comparison too far, but the current Iranian government, whatever you think of it, treat it as Kerensky, treat it as a shield that you want to maintain to prevent the imperialists from coming in and destroying every form of civilization. Now, it's hard to reason with Marxists, but there's an attempt, right, drawn on that experience. In any case, the government of Iran is an indispensable shield against these imperialist excesses, and people who don't see this really need their heads examined, because it means they haven't learned anything from Libya or from what's going on in Syria, because there you see Belhaj and company also going on. Now, since the U.S. and the British don't get what they want from the United Nations, what might they do? To pose such a question, I'm afraid, is to begin to answer it already. We've heard from Churkin correctly that the closing of the embassies may be a prelude to an attack. The French are proposing such an attack in the form of humanitarian corridors. Well, what might it look like? We must now get into the delicate area once again of false flag terrorism, because this is what the U.S. and the British historically do when they don't get what they want through legal or public means. And are there signs of this going on right now? Well, I'm afraid, yes, there are. We have, for example, a guy was found near Topeka, Kansas, with bombs in his car. He was approaching the state capital of Kansas. Now, I don't think it's because Governor Brownback and his anti-labor policies have attracted somebody's attention worldwide, but I think it's because this is part now of the atmospherics, that various patsies are being mobilized. Patsies are being thrown into the field, and we got to see where this goes. But we've got to go to at least a yellow alert and maybe above that in terms of false flag vigilance. So people who have lived through the 9/11 phase and learned something there, time for vigilance on that. So that was the Topeka, Kansas. Now here's the other one. Yesterday, Friday, the 17th of February, here in Washington, D.C., we have Amin el-Khalifi of Alexandria, an obvious mentally deficient patsy, somebody with an IQ of a bowling ball. He was in a, a location a couple of blocks from Capitol Hill. He thought he had a gun, and he thought he had a suicide vest that he could set off, and it turns out these were simply props that couldn't do anything. Now, we don't need to go through all the details about this, but it's clear this is a typical FBI sting, an entrapment. They take some mythomaniac, some poor soul, some wretched character. They give him attention. They give him money. They make him feeling important. They give him equipment. They tell him that the eyes of the world are on him. They tape all of this stuff. And this patsy, psychotic, fanatic, double agent, dupe, all the variations, then becomes the centerpiece of a new revelation, as the Washington Post says. In several recent terrorism sting operations, critics have accused federal investigators of provoking suspects and in some cases suggesting possible targets or tactics. Legal experts say the FBI sometimes walks a fine line in such cases. This is entrapment, and they're even forced to discuss entrapment here at the end of the article. And again, this person is a guaranteed mental deficient. This person is a moron, an imbecile on any personality inventory or intelligence test. Sorry, but that's the way it is. So there's the FBI coming forward, and he's from Morocco, of course. He's a Muslim from Morocco, and he's been hyped based on various incendiary, probably Salafi websites and so forth. So those are two that are now the leading edge. Now we also need to look internationally. The Israelis now claim that 3 of their diplomats have been attacked or almost attacked by Iranians. This is in Georgia, in Tiflis, in Thailand, and in India. So we have 3 cases, and they say all of these are due to Iran. Well, we're skeptical. We're very skeptical. Let's go back to that case where the Iranians were accused of wanting to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the United States, this guy, Adel, the ambassador, right? And turned out it was not the Iranians at all. It was the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, M-E-K. The Mujahideen-e-Khalq is, of course, a U.S.-backed, CIA-run, U.S.-funded terrorist organization which operates against Iranian targets, but is also available for any kinds of provocations that might be forthcoming. So therefore, I would say it is time to focus, first of all, on the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, that they are the likely ones for the attacks on the Israeli diplomats in Georgia, Thailand, and India. And more broadly, we better be on alert now for false flag terror attacks. And I'm afraid we've got some straws in the wind. A reliable pro-Libyan source from the Rocky Mountain area forwards that he's had a conversation with somebody who's involved in airline security. And the airline security buzz is that a threat is emerging for the beginning of March, I think specifically for the first week of March. And it seems to take the form of warnings to bigwigs not to travel in that first week of March. Now, I can't confirm this in any way. These are simply straws in the wind. Once you begin to get a pattern of these, though, then it becomes interesting. So far, there's no pattern. There's just this one that we know of. So that's worth looking into. And again, the important thing is to inoculate public opinion, which is simply to say that if terror events occur, which the U.S. and the British seem to be eager to attribute to Syria or Iran or Hezbollah or even Hamas or other targets, right? Could be Russia, China. We don't know. Could be Algeria. Could be any of the countries that didn't vote the way the U.S. wanted, sort of prima facie um, possible targets. If those events occur and we get the mighty Wurlitzer saying, "Oh, Syria did it, Iran did it, China did it, Russia did it, whoever did it," don't believe them. Remember that the principal source of these things is unfortunately the U.S. and NATO intelligence communities themselves. And the quicker people understand this, the more unlikely it will be for it to happen. Now, in the military side of all of this, right, since we are dealing with this terrible situation, we want to go back to the Millennium Challenge exercise of 2002. This is sometimes known as the Van Riper exercise. General Van Riper was the maverick who ran the bad guy team, the red team. In the course of this, he said that a power controlling the area of Iraq and Iran, more or less, this was August 2002, large-scale war game, one of the biggest ever held. Van Riper found that by using mines, and I really want to stress mines, smaller attack vessels, techniques of swarming with speedboats and smaller patrol craft bearing missiles and so forth. The full details have never really come out, I don't think, but according to published reports, in the Millennium Challenge 2002, the power representing more or less Iraq, Iran today was able to sink one U.S. aircraft carrier, several cruisers, an amphibious assault ship, at least one, and numerous smaller vessels. Something like 15 to 20 ships were sunk. And at that point, they stopped the drill and they readjusted the presuppositions and went back to nothing. So this is Van Riper, and he was quite a maverick. He was a out-of-the-box thinker at the time. Remember, of course, the U.S. has bases in Kuwait, in Qatar, in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman. There may be more. All of these very, very vulnerable to mines. Let's just go back. The British-French attack on Gallipoli, at that point, the Ottoman Empire, right? The Dardanelles, entrance into, towards the Bosphorus into the Black Sea. The 18th of March, 1915, a fleet of 18 battleships pulled into view and began bombarding the Turkish forts. And as a result of some mines that had been laid, the French lost the battleship Bouvet, that was sunk. The British had battleship Irresistible sunk, Inflexible was sunk, and Ocean was also sunk. So 4 battleships were sunk, and the French battleship Suffren was damaged along with the French battleship Gaulois. So 2 battleships severely damaged, 4 sinking beneath the waters. That's Gallipoli. That's all mines. So these are means. They're very low-cost means of asymmetrical warfare, and they. I think you have to focus on that Millennium Challenge to see what might occur. Now let's move on to some. Let's talk about Greece. Let's talk about the European financial crisis. Now, this has gone way too far. It is time for a Greek debt moratorium. What I have recommended consistently for, I think, about a year and a half, or since the fall of 2010, maybe even earlier. We'll look on the website. Since in particular, since I went to Iceland when I came up with this policy for all of the victims of the European area, it's time for an orderly debt moratorium by law in the form of a debt freeze, saying that all financial debt, international financial debt, derivatives debt, and related debt of Greece is hereby frozen, and it will not be paid until conditions can be negotiated that are acceptable to Greece. The big lie about this entire thing is this is not a Greek crisis. This is a banking crisis. It is a crisis of the private banks, not of Greece. Greece has been around for a long time and will be around for a long time to come. Deutsche Bank, Societe Generale, I'm not so sure. Barclays Bank also, not so sure. The tremendous intellectual capitulation of the entire Greek story is that people have accepted the portrayal of this crisis as a crisis of Greece. It is not. It's a crisis of those banks that made those loans, right? They made the loans. They deal with the consequences. Greece cannot be destroyed, cannot be mangled on this cross of debt payment, as certain people seem to think. Obviously, there's plenty of blame to go around, but this is the point. The only way to do anything about this now is an immediate, orderly debt moratorium. The fact that this has been portrayed as a crisis of Greece also, and that the debt moratorium weapon has not been brandished up to now, means that the Greek side has unilaterally deprived itself of all of the leverage and retaliatory capabilities that you get when you're a big debtor and the creditor knows that you can bring him down. In other words, this idea now that Greece is being scapegoated, that Greece is being blamed, that the Greeks are profligates, that the Greeks are lazy, that the whole German press buys into this, that Schäuble, we've reached the limits of Schäuble. I mean, I've had some good things to say about him in the past, but now Schäuble is off in the wild blue yonder with his demands for austerity. This is absolutely unacceptable. He says no elections in Greece and government by technocrat. Well, Schäuble, it's time to butt out. It's time to go home if that's the best you can do. Even Herbert Hoover in June of 1931 knew that it was time for a moratorium. In that case, for Germany, it was time for a debt freeze. So then we had the Hoover moratorium. Too little, too late, and too short. Needed to be open-ended, not 1 year. But if the Hoover administration can do it, can't we find somebody who can do it? And the way you do it is you sit down with Deutsche Bank and Societe Generale and Barclays Bank and you say, look, we have the bazooka in our pocket, boys, and it's called the debt moratorium, and we're now going to use it. And you better be forthcoming in post-debt moratorium financing, or you'll get absolutely nothing. We might give you 5 or 10% if you help us in the post-debt moratorium. But if you think you're going to cut us off and drive us out of your financial system and out of the euro, then you will get nothing. We'll even seize and confiscate the assets you have in country. We'll leave you nothing but your eyes to cry with. In other words, this is a capitulation. Papandreou was an agent of the International Monetary Fund. Papademos is an agent of the International Monetary Fund. One, the control mechanisms go through Soros, and the second, international. The other one that goes through, what did we say? Lehman Brothers. No, I'm sorry. The first, the bank of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, in the case of Papademos. We're told that the private investors are going to get a 50% haircut. They're glad to get that haircut because 50% on those bonds is more than they'll get on the market they love so much. They gain as a result of this. So you can't put yourself in a position of trying to strong-arm private investors for a deal that gives them more that they could get on the open market. It's ridiculous. You've got to use the inherent leverage of being a debtor and saying, look, if you push me too hard, I'm not going to pay you anything. As a matter of fact, I'm going to freeze the debt payments right now, and I'll negotiate with you about the future debt payments, but that will be done in the light of how you treat me after the fact. And, of course, what we really need to do is to get to the phase of seizing the European Central Bank and using the Wojtyński-Lautenbach method of national credit creation for national infrastructure, and national job creation. Now, the package that is offered to Greece is obscene. It's out of the question. Nevertheless, in the Greek parliament, 199 to 74 in favor of the package with 27 abstentions. Well, it looks like about 1/4 of the Greek parliament are still human. I guess some of them have been expelled because they didn't toe the line for the IMF. And of course, it's not just the IMF, it's the Troika, right? It's the European Commission with Barroso and Olli Rehn. It's the European Central Bank. It's the International Monetary Fund, now Madame de la Garce, who is running the show over there. Eurocrats, Eurogarchs, finance oligarchs, these slimy creatures. The 1%, the 1/1000th of 1%, quite a few of them. Absolutely unacceptable. Let's look at some of the proposals that have now been forced through. They're not just proposals; they're blackmail. The Greek minimum wage is cut by 22%. Are we nuts? This is what happened in the Nazi occupation. There's no comparison. This is what fascist governments would do. 150,000 government layoffs over the next 2 years. Right now, the unemployment rate in Greece officially 21%. That means it's got to be in the neighborhood of 40%. And as a result, and I think this is really important for our Ron Paul believers here, our Ron Paul faithful, if we still have any, the gross domestic product of Greece has shrunk by 7% as a direct result of the austerity measures done so far. This proves what I'm telling you. You cut the budget now, you're going to shrink the GDP, you're going to shrink tax revenues, you're going to end up with a bigger deficit the second time around in the out years, as we say here. All of this now is this round of bloodletting. We saw the distinguished Professor Krugman on television this week talking about bloodletting. Yeah, it's bloodletting. So that Greece can pay 14.4 billion euros on March 20th. And of course, that money is given to Greece, and then as soon as it gets to Greece, if it gets there at all, it turns around and goes into the pockets of Deutsche Bank, Societe Generale, Barclays Bank, and so forth. In other words, the Eurogarchs of finance. It's time to end this. It's time to declare a debt moratorium. There's even the attempt now to put Greece under a protectorate, an open regime of limited sovereignty. This reminds me of Theodore Roosevelt's imperialism in Latin America, where you take over the customs house and you take over the banks. So the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF will be exercising special oversight. They'll be essentially running the Greek economy. They are demanding more guarantees. They're demanding some kind of pledge that no future government will overturn the crazy austerity measures that have been fought in. Well, this has to be opposed. People in Greece have to figure out how to oppose it. But the obvious clarion call is debt moratorium now. Get the foreigners out. You don't have to leave the euro. There's no reason to do that. You can stay in the euro and get financing if you know how to negotiate, and I would. You can get the financing you need inside the euro, and indeed you can begin to shake loose political forces in other countries, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Spain, and even others, even in France, that would be favorable to forcing the European Central Bank into a national banking mode, a Lautenbach-Voitinsky or Lend-Lease mode, where the bank would be issuing successive tranches of 1 trillion euros at a shot, century bonds to build the infrastructure and the other improvements that these societies need. So what is being done to Greece is obscene. It can only be done in a complete vacuum of political leadership. The debt moratorium is the key to that leadership. Now, similar problems we have here in the United States. Well, actually, before we do that, let's do Egypt. Oh, Egypt, same kind of story here, and this is amazing. The Muslim Brotherhood, of course, is now a big power in Egypt, and it turns out that the Muslim Brotherhood has gotten phone calls from the International Monetary Fund, and the goal was that the International Monetary Fund was asking the Muslim Brotherhood. It's a little bit similar to Greece. The IMF asked the Ikhwan, please, you should commit to the conditionalities that we're going to attach to the next loan to Egypt. Now, this is a really critical moment, and I'm afraid it doesn't look good for the Muslim Brotherhood. I tried challenging one of their representatives a couple of months ago on one of the international cable shows to respond on this, and they wouldn't. I'm not surprised. But here's the idea. The Muslim Brotherhood campaigned on the idea not so much that they were going to crack down on alcohol, bikinis, or whatever it is, but they said, we will fight corruption and we will do something to raise the standard of living of the poorest people in Egypt, the Falachin. And here we have it in the Wall Street Journal today. Muslim Brotherhood looks west in bid to revive Egyptian economy. I've been pointing to this for several months, and now here it is. They've gotten a phone call. It's a question of getting a $3.2 billion IMF loan. And sure enough, the Muslim Brotherhood is now lining up with the IMF. Now, I have to point out to them, this is absolute folly. You cannot fulfill your pledges to the Falachin, to the wretched, downtrodden masses who suffered under Mubarak. This is an oligarchical system, dear brothers. This is usury. This is the biggest Satan of usury anywhere in the world. Here's what a spokesman for them says. Issam El-Haddad, foreign policy advisor to the Muslim Brotherhood. He says, quote, there was a real skepticism inside the Muslim Brotherhood about any money coming from the IMF. On the other hand, we also know we need IMF expertise in how to reform our economy, how to close tax loopholes, how to deal with budget deficits, etc. Oh, no. This is exactly what you don't want. You don't want the IMF. They have no expertise. This is absolutely crazy. Somebody better call the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and tell them no. They're giddy with self-importance. They got a phone call from J.P. Morgan Chase asking, will the Muslim Brotherhood meet with us? J.P. Morgan talked to them, and so forth. They're willing to do whatever the IMF wants. This is absolutely dismal. This is the worst thing that's happened in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood, on profile, really, not a surprise, saying that since Egypt is running into an economic wall, that they're willing to capitulate to the conditionalities of the International Monetary Fund. That is just horrendous. And people who fought their way through Tahrir, they have another reason to realize that this was one big failure, if that's what it gets you to. Now, let's not leave the U.S. out of this. We've just had the complete and final failure of Occupy Wall Street in terms of the immediate legislative calendar. We just had the Obama budget has been submitted this week. I haven't had time to go through the Obama budget in all the details, but it's $3.8 trillion. It's got various things in it. He has some minor taxes on the wealthiest. 3.8 trillion spending plan, higher taxes on the rich, but it's a couple of percentage points. What he does not have, of course, is the Wall Street sales tax, the one thing that strikes fear into the heart of finance oligarchs all over the world. But let's look at it now. What Obama has put through in not the budget, because that takes weeks and months, but in terms of this the bill that went through the Congress and will be signed by Obama this coming week, this is to prolong the payroll tax cut on Social Security. Well, this is, of course, a cheap trick by Obama that $40 a week is going to mean anything in terms of recovery. This is laughable. And, of course, what it does is it sets up the Social Security system for destruction further down the road. So it's small bore, pathetic, minor window dressing with a huge cost. It tends to destroy the Social Security system. And undoubtedly, Obama's treachery is that is what he wants. And then it does have one positive thing. I concede the doc fix, that the planned cut of about 1/4 in the payment rates for Medicare, healthcare for older people. The doc fix is included. So there will be no cut of 25% in the payments that Medicare is willing to make to participating physicians. A lot of them would have had to drop out. A lot of them would have had to give up under those circumstances. But let's look at the unemployment situation. We used to talk about the 99ers. I remember Ed Schultz said, he was going to fight for the 99ers. I didn't see him fighting this week for the 99ers. The 99ers are people who have been unemployed for more than 99 weeks, and under the current law, they have no more unemployment payments left, so they get nothing. They get food stamps if they're lucky, and that's it. They're on their own. They're destitute. They lose everything, their homes and everything else. Those are the 99ers. Now, the wonderful Obama, now having heard the voice of Occupy Wall Street and the need to do something for the 99%, he has a payroll tax cut that's going to destroy Social Security further down the road. And I think Bernie Sanders voted against this entire thing because he wants to call attention to the fact that this is financed by destroying Social Security later on. That's what Obama is doing. So Bernie seems to have understood that fine. But how about the unemployment benefits? It used to be 99 weeks. Now it's 73 weeks, but only if you're in a state like Michigan or California or a number of others, New Jersey. There is a list. You can find it online. States that have very high levels of unemployment, you can get up to 73 weeks. But you see what it is. This is half a year. They've cut 6 months of unemployment benefits out of the program. So the 99ers are completely shafted. They don't even exist anymore. None of these Democratic hacks has anything to say for the 99ers. And now we've got a new category of the disinherited, those between 73 weeks and 99 weeks, right? And that's 26 weeks. That's half a year of benefits, except that if you live in a state where unemployment is a little bit less, then the unemployment benefits will only be 40 weeks to 63 weeks. So whatever you've done for the people who are working and paying the payroll tax, you've more than stripped that away by this dirty, rotten deal that Obama, Van Hollen, Pelosi, and the rest of them have signed on to. So as of the implementation of this law, if Obama signs it, which he will, the most unemployment benefits you're going to get is 73 weeks if you're in a high unemployment state. Otherwise, you're going to be getting 40 weeks to 63 weeks. That is just a dirty, rotten sellout. And, of course, Obama had been beating his breast for the millionaire tax. Well, don't hold your breath on that one. There's nothing in there. And I call this the failure of Occupy Wall Street, because the reason I say that is if Occupy Wall Street had political leaders instead of these smelly anarchists, these creepy facilitators, and these saboteurs and wreckers, you could have forced through a Wall Street sales tax. Why not? With proper leadership, with an understanding of mass strike dynamics, the dialectic of mass action and political action inside the Congress, you could have rammed through a Wall Street sales tax of 1%, which would say then we'll have unlimited unemployment benefits. We'll do something for the 99ers. We won't create new disinherited categories, right? People who have stripped of their economic rights. We can have full funding for Medicare. We got to make up the $500 billion that Obama gouged out of Medicare for his Obamacare. And we can obviously do the doc fix and relate it. And we don't need this cheap political trick of cutting the payroll tax when we know that's going to put Social Security in danger later on. So there's the failure of Occupy Wall Street without a whimper. And I don't think anybody's made this connection, but there it is. Now, one or two other things. We're headed for a vote in Moscow on March 4th. And at this program, as you know, we're firmly in the pro-Putin camp. We want Putin and nobody else as president of Russia. And we want Putin minus Kudrin, minus Medvedev, minus the appeasers, minus the neoliberals. We want a Russian government worthy of the name. This is simply a friendly gesture, not interfering or anything of the kind. So what we're told is that the Kremlin, in other words, the Russian media, and we're going to try to follow this more. I'm quoting here from an article in today's Washington Post, Saturday, February 18th. Putin allies sharpen anti-U.S. attacks ahead of election. And it says this reflects KGB and Soviet thinking. What does the Obama foreign policy represent? Right? Is it seems it represents von Ribbentrop's kind of thinking, or maybe rollback in the Cold War, right? The more extreme ones. We're told that a favorite target of the attacks is Michael McFaul. Now, this is very interesting. Michael McFaul, of course, is a quackademic. He was blabbing all the way during the 1990s, big supporter of shock therapy, big supporter of Yeltsin, of Gaidar, of Chubais, of Anders Aslund, and Jeffrey Sachs, these hyenas of shock therapy that wrecked the Russian economy, precipitated the entire Soviet middle class into abject poverty. So he's now on the scene, and he's rightly being targeted as the attempted bringer of the White Revolution. When McFaul arrived in Moscow on January 14th, McFaul and Deputy Secretary of State William Burns were entering the U.S. Embassy. They were accosted by a group of young people identifying themselves as television reporters and demanding to know the purpose of the visit. And the point is that the Russian opposition is paid for by the National Endowment for Democracy and, of course, the CIA. And they're right. That's what it is. It goes back on November 27th. Putin began targeting Golos, the so-called election watchdog. In reality, it's a means of launching color revolutions by claiming that elections are not accurate. This paid for by the U.S. The Russian parliament, the Duma, is considering a ban of all foreign grants to Russian organizations. Go ahead and do it. We support it from over here. We don't want tax money being spent on that. That's not the kind of foreign aid we want. Put that money into emergency food aid so a few fewer people starve to death in the Horn of Africa. But don't give it to somebody like Navalny, right, with his fascist gesticulations. So how much U.S. money is involved? Well, we know Navalny represents Yale, Harvard, and this is even now an issue. A columnist on the RT website usefully finds that Hillary Clinton, and former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright had ordered McFaul to groom revolutionaries, that is, subversion operatives in Russia, and that McFaul had sent prominent blogger Alexei Navalny to Yale as part of that project. Well, that's where he went. He went to Yale, to Harvard, to Cambridge with money from the National Endowment for Democracy. But McFaul, the ambassadorial quackademic, tweets that it's not true. U.S. money being used to stir up the White Revolution? Absolutely. Now, our last complex of today, the U.S. presidential race. And, well, the news we have is once again about Ron Paul. And in particular, we have news about Ron Paul's presumably largest single financial backer. He is a guy called Peter Thiel, Thiel. Peter Thiel has given Ron Paul, or better yet, a super PAC supporting Ron Paul, which allows a contribution of this size. Peter Thiel, or Thiel, has given Ron Paul $900,000. So almost $1 million has gone to a super PAC called Endorse Liberty. Who is Peter Thiel? He is the founder of PayPal. He rakes off commissions on these PayPal payments. But most interesting for our purposes, he is a member of the Bilderberger Group, that group of wealthy reactionary elitists founded by Prince Bernhard of Holland and also Prince Philip of Great Britain. Peter Thiel is not only a member of the Bilderberger Group, he's a member of the Bilderberger Steering Committee. So he's not just a wealthy elitist of the ultra 1%. He is practically the 0.00001% that is represented by the Bilderberger Steering Committee. So he gives $1 million to Ron Paul. What are Peter Thiel's other activities? He has a foundation which encourages students to drop out of college. Isn't that great? This is obviously an attack on the family. Anybody who's been a parent, you know the sacrifices you make to put your kid into college, right, to get financial aid, to do the tests, to do all these other things. And then Peter Thiel comes along and says, oh, I'm a multimillionaire. You can do it too. You should drop out. And the kid drops out. Now, it's clear what this is. The reactionaries have always hated the GI Bill of Rights. They can't stand the idea that the middle class, the lower middle class, and even significant parts of the working class get to go to college. They want to make college what it was, say, in the 1920s, the exclusive preserve of the richest elitists, of the best families from which the mass of the U.S. population are excluded. So they're attempting to roll back the GI Bill of Rights on home ownership and also on college education. And you can hear reactionaries, all kinds, saying that, college education is not a good deal. We shouldn't allow it. There's too much money flowing into education. It's time to break that up. They regard this as a center of political opposition to their reactionary plans. And there's some truth to that, although the ideological problems of the colleges are other in another or Malthusian direction or postmodernist direction. But the goal here, obviously, is to discredit the idea of a college education, right? To try to attack this and to show that it's cool to get a grant from Peter Thiel and drop out of college. The other thing this rich reactionary elitist Thiel does is, well, he's a Republican, and he's actually a gay activist inside the Republican Party, and he advocates what is known as seasteading. It's like this, if you know the Kevin Costner Waterworld movie, the Waterworld where there's no land, right? That post-apocalyptic future. I think with Peter Thiel, it's clear he wants to create sovereign entities that float, and he wants to therefore escape the laws of existing nation states to do what? Well, obviously speculation, right? There's no better way to be offshore than to be all the way offshore, and other nefarious activities. Just let your imagination work, and you can conclude what they are. So that's a very interesting one. We want to remember that Ron Paul, in his speech in 2001 in the floor of the House, has assured us there is nothing to fear from globalism, free trade, and a single world currency. Globalism, free trade, and a single world currency represent nothing to fear. Globalism, of course, Deregulation that brought you derivatives, privatization that brought you Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac as for-profit entities, deregulation, privatization, union busting, and of course the Paul dynasty interested in smashing unions everywhere they can with their right to work law. I'm very sorry to say that the right to work law, union busting law, more accurately, has now been passed in Indiana. So Indiana now joins the backward southern states with their low wage economies and their lack of worker rights and other protections. So too bad for Indiana. We'll have to refight that one at the earliest opportunity. Deregulation, privatization, union busting, the destruction of a state sector, if you have one, the destruction of the social safety net, and we still do have one. That's globalism. So Ron Paul says, don't worry about any of that. That's all fine. Universal free trade is fine. No government, no state gets to influence what goes in and out of its own borders. And a single world currency, and that would be a commodity currency. It would be gold, right, which these gold fetishists believe is somehow the natural money. That is a different path to the New World Order, but it is equally destructive. In other words, it's clear that these Freemasonic forces have attempted to cover both the establishment route, which is the one you see with neocons and wars, and then there's the what can we say, the low-cost version with globalism enacted simply by law, free trade imposed everywhere, and this one world currency. It all comes from the Austrian school of von Mises and von Hayek. And we're reminded, various things popping up on the internet, it is the Rockefeller family, the arch reactionary finance capitalists par excellence, who funded Mises and others when they came to the United States. They supported them with research grants, got them jobs at the University of Chicago, which of course was founded by Rockefeller. So this entire Austrian construct is a Rockefeller special, and I don't know what would make that more explicit. That people who are prating about the need to implement the discredited and indeed hated doctrines of the Austrian school, that somehow this is the true American tradition. I'm sorry, I missed that. I don't see any discussion of the Austrian school in the Constitutional Convention. I can't find it in the Constitution. I don't find it in the Gettysburg Address or the House Divided Speech or indeed in any of the fireside chats, except as something to be mocked and to be opposed. So that's the Austrian school. And then one final item here in the New York Times, the 17th of February, 2012, yesterday as we tape, the New York Times writes, Mitt Romney and Ron Paul, friendly amid the rivalry. And this refers to what I've been pointing out for a number of weeks. I put it out on Twitter and on this broadcast. There is a united front between Ron Paul, who pretends to be the peace candidate, and Mitt Romney, the arch-reactionary, genocidal warmonger and asset stripper. This is a convergence, and it's just there. They are described as friends on the trail, that Romney went out of his way to cultivate Paul early on. Notice that the critique of Romney done by Ron Paul and his followers is purely pro forma, that he's a flip-flopper. Well, this, as Paolo Sarpi would say, this is the art of saying something nice about somebody while pretending to say something bad. If you're a genocidal warmonger and an asset stripper, then to say that you're a flip-flopper, this is truly pretty small beer. So it's a way to keep various dupes engaged, right, to make them think that you're doing a critique of Romney. But there is no bad blood. Rather, there's tremendous goodwill. According to the New York Times, Ron Paul generally says that Santorum, Gingrich, and Romney are identical. They're all the same. But then, quote, Ron Paul seems to segregate those views from their personal relations. So the idea is that There's a close friendship of the families. Anne Romney gets along really well with Carol Paul. The children and grandchildren are all very friendly. And the article points to the obvious moment in the South Carolina primary when Perry and Gingrich were correctly attacking Romney as an asset stripper and a hedge fund hyena and vulture capitalist. That was when Ron Paul came out and defended Romney as embodying the spirit of capitalism. Ron Paul got $8 million he got $10 million in the first quarter. He expects to. He got $13 million in the fourth quarter of last year and $8 million in the third quarter of last year. And I don't know whether that reflects the almost $1 million from the Bilderberger Steering Committee member Peter Thiel. What could underline the convergence of Romney and Paul? I've suggested in the past. There are two obvious things. One is racial views. The Mormon Church notoriously, the holy books still say that if you're black, you cannot be saved, you cannot be a member of the clergy, and you are cast into the outer darkness where there is much wailing and gnashing of teeth. And that has been, there are certain cosmetic changes, but the main text has never been changed. It still stands. And if you go to Salt Lake City, Utah, you'll find it's the most lily-white place in the world that I've ever seen. Anyway, so there's that racial view, and that seems to dovetail pretty well with what Ron Paul represents, which is the Scottish Rite southern branch, the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry based in Cincinnati. It's a branch of a British-Scottish operation, and these are the Dixiecrats. These are the Confederates. These are the people who brought you Civil War, nullification, interposition, the Dixiecrat Party of the 1940s, Strom Thurmond, and all the rest of them. That's the Scottish Rite southern jurisdiction. So there I see a clear convergence. And those quotes in the Ron Paul newsletters, they're over a period of 7 or 8 years. They're very explicit. They will not go away. You cannot say I was unaware of this stuff. That is a bad joke. And if you didn't write them, then who did? Was it Lew Rockwell? Who was it? The other question then is the deregulation of marriage. We know that Ron Paul's freedom agenda, he says liberty across the board. The deregulation of marriage means that the federal government will have no definition of marriage whatsoever, and the states can then do whatever they want, and the states can then say whatever any church says is a marriage, and that would presumably include the polygamy, which is still also prescribed in the holy books of the Mormon Church. It would also open the door wide to Sharia law. It would open the door wide to polygamy of that kind, which is generally not practiced in some place like Iraq before the U.S. invasion or Libya, right? But it's the polygamous part of it is something that's generally de-emphasized in the non-monarchical parts of the Arab or Islamic world as a general rule. So the deregulation of marriage that Ron Paul wants would seem to dovetail also with the concern perhaps of the Mormons who would like to bring back polygamy. So what it shows, of course, is that people supporting these candidates really need to study them and realize what it is you're supporting, because otherwise you'll get all sorts of very nasty and ugly surprises. And as an example, we need look no further than Obama, right? People who believed Obama's peace rhetoric found that he didn't intend anything like that, and indeed he intended quite the opposite. And let me just refer in closing once again. I was on an international cable news debate this past week with a lady who was she represented the national leadership of the Libertarian Party, and they say they're probably going to nominate Gary Johnson, the reactionary former governor of one of the southwestern states who did appear in one of the Republican debates, but she was willing also to defend Ron Paul, and she said you can't expect Ron Paul to take advantage of the fact that he's the only serving member of the House of Representatives in the Republican field, and do something like impeach Obama for the Libyan war, or impeach Panetta for opening the door wide to a ruinous U.S. Involvement against Iran. You can't expect that. He's busy out on the campaign trail. And again, I have to say, too busy to do something to stop World War III. That's just pathetic. And that indicates a suspension, not just of disbelief, but a suspension of intelligence and thinking, which is, I think, scandalous in its own right. It's time to open our eyes and see what's going on. Now, a couple of housekeeping notes here at the very end. If you don't find my program on GCN Live, as has been the case now over the last 3 weeks, unfortunately, you've got to come to tarpley.net, and you go to the World Crisis Radio page of tarpley.net, and you will find this broadcast. Now, I did one broadcast from Iran. It was possible since there was no Skype, no telephone, and no all sorts of other things, no Twitter and various others. What I was able to do was to tape and make some MP3 tapes on a computer, send those as part of an email. Those were then reassembled. So I refer you back to that one. That was just a couple of interviews, one on Bahrain and one with a distinguished talk show host, Nader of the Raz program. An interview with him of about an hour. Extremely interesting and very insightful, very thoughtful person. That's available as the last item here on World Crisis Radio through tarpley.net. And now we've got this one. So please do take a look. And whenever you don't find it at Genesis Communications Network, then please look for it here at tarpley.net. And otherwise, always look to tarpley.net. I've got a couple of interviews this week from Press TV. I'll have the one from Atlantic Television News up, presumably during the course of the next week. Always go to tarpley.net, and always take a look at Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed, where the media appearances are announced in advance, at least usually, so that you can see those live if that's the easiest way for you to see it. So with that, let me come to an end of this week's broadcast. And again, we're just wrapping up here on the afternoon of Saturday, the 18th of February, 2012. And we'll see you again next week, presumably on GCNlive.com. But again, if for some technical reason that doesn't work out, always check here at tarpley.net. We'll see you next week.